I think I might be here. Hello, everyone. Someone can let me know if I am. Anyway, nice to see all of you. I can't see you, but you can see me. I'm Dr. Wendy Sue Swanson. I'm a general pediatrician, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer for SpoonfulOne. And so I'm just going to do a big overview on really what we know in kind of modern science and what we know, practically speaking, about how to feed a baby in 2020. It's, of course, this crazy, complicated, painful time, and we know a lot more than we used to know about feeding. So I just want to get started. I'm not sure. I'm hoping people can see me. Stacy, if you're listening, just send me a text and tell me if you can actually hear me here. So when it comes to infant feeding, first and foremost, your baby's nutrition begins, of course, during your pregnancy. And without question, what you eat in pregnancy matters. And that mostly is behind us now if you've already had your baby. And, the one thing that you really want to know about from all the things of kind of diet diversity is that we want to make sure you don't restrict anything. Of course, we tell you to watch out for different cheeses and different meats because of bacterial contamination, et cetera. And we talk about fish, of course, in moderation, and of course, listen to all those things. But the number one thing we're really learning about how your body's kind of immune system learns about food is that the more different, kind of the bouquet of different kinds of food that you offer your baby when they're growing in utero and that you offer your baby ex utero when they're out in the world with you, the more the better, the more the diversity. So if you've heard kind of about those concepts of the hygiene hypothesis, you don't want to over clean around your baby. In fact, we know babies who are born on farms or babies that live in rural areas, for example, compared to babies who live in the city, grow up to have less allergic disease, less sensitization because they're just exposed to bacteria and fungus. In fact, if you raise your baby in a house that also has a dog, we know you're less likely to have allergic disease as well. And so the reason being the dog tracks in all sorts of stuff from the dirt and bacteria, and they lick your baby and they get all sorts of that kind of microbiome diversity. It's really no different with food. So anyway, if you're still pregnant, one of the things you just want to make sure of is that you're not holding off on tree nuts or shellfish or eggs or sesame or soy, all those really common food allergies that we see here in the United States. But in general, your baby's born. And of course, you're going to get tons of support from lactation consultants, from, doulas, from your pediatrician or your family practitioner, whoever you choose to see. And you're going to kind of get in that rhythm. And if you choose breastfeeding or you choose formula, without question, in the beginning, it's a liquid diet for your baby. We of course want to make sure mom's nutrition is really great because you are leaching out all those minerals and vitamins into breast milk. And of course, usually within the first couple weeks or to a month, we want you to add in vitamin D. And your pediatrician will remind you about this. And that's just because we don't necessarily excrete as much vitamin D in our breast milk. And we know it's really certainly easy to add into the diet and is really good for bone health and even some immune dysfunction later on in life that we know vitamin D early in life can be really helpful. And that's especially true if you've got dark skin. And it's especially true if you live in low light climates. I live in Madison, Wisconsin. And in the winter, if you have a baby here, you're really not getting a lot of sunlight and you're not getting as much vitamin D because of it. And then there comes on kind of like, well, what are the strategies that when you start feeding food? And, I work at SpoonfulOne. So SpoonfulOne is a company founded by a world-renowned pediatric allergist and colleague of mine who is, an MD, PhD. She's a protein biochemist. She runs the allergy center at Stanford University. And she said, instead of just spending her life taking care of kids who have allergies already, she wanted to kind of get in the prevention game. And so she really designed around how to make it feasible for families to do what we know today. And that's about getting all these different foods in, which I'll tell you a little bit about. But when you start solid food introduction, number one, you're just thinking about when is your baby showing you that they're ready? There's a big focus right now on baby-led weaning. That means baby decides when they start to eat foods, but that's a really smart cue. Even if you don't kind of follow strict baby-led weaning, you start looking at your baby. So babies that are ready to eat solid foods, and I mean like pureed baby foods or small smushy parts of the different foods you're eating in your family home, they do a couple of things on their own. They need to be able to sit up independently in a little chair, meaning that they've got to have that kind of tummy strength and sit up. They need to make sure that they have really good head control. So you'll know that as your baby's kind of 2 to 4 months of age, they'll really start to be able to hold their head up well. And when you're feeding, you want to make sure that your baby can really control that area. So they have to have really good head control. And then they're going to start to show you that they're ready. So, I always used to joke that my kids literally would go like they would lick the air. Like we'd be sitting at dinner or sitting at breakfast and I'd be eating something delicious and they'd smell it and they were like trying to get at it. So babies will show you that. And then also as you offer them a spoon or you offer them any kind of food, once you put it in their open mouth, that they don't kind of what's called tongue thrust. They don't just spit it out. Now babies will do that as they're exploring new flavor and as they're exploring texture. But if they do it with every single thing you try, it probably means you're just a little bit early. And then once they kind of show you all those signs, it's like, okay, you get to decide on that very magical day what exactly you want to feed your baby. And, you know, that's completely up to you. There is not a single study in the world that says there's a single best first food. So you get to decide. It could be a really soft avocado that you mushed up. It could be a little bit of baby cereal that you've thinned with express breast milk, or you've thinned with a little bit of formula. It could be, you know, any like soft potato smushy. It could be just a stage 1 baby food that you buy that you allow, you know, it's kind of a drippy slurry that you're going to put on a spoon and give to your baby. But what you have to know, a couple things. Babies have a lot more taste buds than you and I do. So we're all born with this huge amount of taste buds. And as we age, we lose those taste buds over time. So every single thing you give your baby is going to be like a flavor explosion. And I mean that. You never want to add salt. You never want to add sugar. You never need to add spices to baby food because everything they're tasting is like a nirvana. It's like this big, huge, crazy explosion. So you're going to watch your baby doing that, but it doesn't matter what your first food is. The number one thing you have to think about is you've got to be really intentional. We have to, with great intent, think about, okay, I'm not going to hold off on getting these foods because the new research on food allergies is very, very clear. The old advice of holding off on foods, we know, increase the number of kids with food allergies. In fact, you know, we know there are 6 million kids in the United States with food allergies. That's 2 kids in every single American classroom that is currently at home on Zoom, like my kids, but 2 kids in every classroom. And we know that in part, that's just because of our modern world and our modern susceptibility. But it's also likely because we told parents to hold off on these foods. The number one thing you can't do is go really slow. You can't get to 9 or 10 months and not have introduced soy and not have introduced nut and not have introduced peanut and not have introduced eggs. In fact, we want you to get all those different proteins into your baby's tummy where their immune system is learning about food. And we want you to do that every single day. So when you're starting foods, pick a food, do another new food the next day. You don't need to wait a number of days in between. In fact, a research study just published this week out of Northwestern really shows that pediatricians are still giving old advice, and yet we don't want you to wait a long time. So if you introduce, you know, banana today, you can introduce peach tomorrow, and the next day you can introduce rice cereal, and the next day you can put peanut butter really lightly into that rice cereal and thin, so it's age, you know, kind of texture appropriate. But every single day you can do a new food, and you don't necessarily have to do one at a time, but lots of families will feel really comfortable doing that. And then it's making sure you get them in pretty rapidly over time, meaning that your baby may love one food, and it's so fun to feed your baby a food that they love because they coo and they smile and they eat the whole thing up, and it makes us feel so awesome as parents. But you need to just keep trying. In fact, most studies will show that babies will try something 20 times and then start to like it later. So you, in some ways, you can make a picky eater, and you don't want to make a picky eater. So you just keep offering this and offering that, and little bits of, as your baby's getting older and able to take kind of chunkier, soft foods as they get into 6, 7, 8 months, you know, a little scrambled egg here, a little bit of soft potato here, a little bit of the soup that you're eating here. We want all those foods in. But we know too that when you're thinking about how's your body and how's your baby learning about foods, their flavor preferences are developing when they're 4 to 7 months of age. So in that window, when you're just starting solid foods, when they show it, you want bitter food. You want some naturally sweet food. You don't want to add sugar to anything. You want, you don't want to add salt to anything, but you want kale mixed stuff if you've got it. You want a little bite of your soup if you've got it. You want the pureed foods that you want. You can make a little smoothie, etc. And the number one thing we know too, though, is that families have kind of come out being worried about certain foods. Lots of families are worried about the introduction to peanut. And frankly, you don't need to be worried about the introduction to peanut if you're doing it really early. So even babies who are high risk at developing a food allergy, those are kids with eczema, so broken down skin rash, because foods kind of get introduced to their body through their skin before their tummy. We want it to get into their tummy really well. Or kids with a family history of food allergies, or kids with a lack of diet diversity. So if there's kids out there just having breast milk or just having formula, and they're just eating 1 or 2 foods, and they're just only eating 1 or 2 foods until 7 or 8 months of age, they've missed a whole window of time when that immune system is growing and growing up and learning kind of how to eat and how to tolerate foods. And so we want you to get those foods in regularly and repeatedly. So it's just making sure that you're moving through them. I don't want you to wait for peanut until 9 months. In fact, we know if you feed, peanut protein through something like SpoonfulOne, or you've mixed it into your baby's food, and soy and sesame and, shellfish and fish, those hard to kind of get in foods, we know that the likelihood of allergic reaction is extremely low. And we know the earlier you introduce potential allergens, the likelihood of a reaction is also lower. So the longer you wait, the bigger the risk that a child's already developed a food allergy that you can't prevent at that point. And you also know that reactions get bigger. So early is great. And all those different foods early is better. Now, it can be super hard to do that, of course. And that's why we've developed SpoonfulOne. So SpoonfulOne, I'll just show you a little bit about. SpoonfulOne is a combination of 16 different foods. So this is just like a little package I can show you. And inside the package, you get like a week's supply of SpoonfulOne. And what's really incredible, so our founder, Dr. Kari Nadeau, went to the laboratory at Stanford. She studied 450 babies and children. So they were like 4 months of age all the way up to 10. And for a year, that some kids fed on a single food, some kids fed on a double food, and some kids fed on a whole mix of different common allergens. And that's kind of what was the science behind SpoonfulOne. And after a year, she checked to see how were these kids' immune systems? Were they less allergic in nature? Were they more allergic? And the kids who were eating all the different mixed proteins were far less allergic. And it didn't matter if they were eating just what we have in ours, 30 milligrams of each food, or 300 milligrams of different foods, for example. The effect was the same. So SpoonfulOne was designed to say, we're going to take the 16 foods that make up 90% of the foods that cause food allergies in kids. We're going to give them in exactly measured amounts, 30 milligrams. We're going to make sure it's safe and not contaminated. And we're going to make sure that proteins are still intact. So it's all checked before. And in this packet, or even in this packet of puffs, the exact same amount of these 16 foods are in there. There's nothing magic about it. They're just the foods, and there's 16 different foods. So if you took a blender and you mixed up all these different 16 foods every day and you fed it to your baby and they really liked it, that would work too. But we did it. So we said, we basically said, we know it's really hard for parents to practically put this in. We know some days babies have a good day eating. Some days babies and toddlers have a good day eating. Sometimes they have a food fight. Sometimes they refuse it. Sometimes someone's not feeling that well. We wanted to make sure that the immune system was getting all these different foods every single day. So tree nuts, peanut, soy, milk, egg, and then these really hard ones like shrimp, cod, and salmon, sourced from all over the world. Proteins are down, and they're included in each of these, and they're made to taste delicious. So this can be, basically poured into a bottle, dissolved into express breast milk or formula, and given with a stage 3, like a, stage 3 nipple or after, easily given to a baby at 4 months of age. You get all these different proteins in every day. The immune system gets used to these foods as it's growing up, so it doesn't develop an allergy or a sensitization. And then once babies are over 6 months and they start to self-feed, these are dissolvable puffs. So in this packet of puffs, baby can just chomp on the package of puffs sitting in the kitchen table while you're preparing dinner or something, getting all those different 16 foods. And then we also have oat crackers that come for when babies are older, because here's the key. As you're thinking about feeding your baby, you're looking for those signs of readiness. You're not going slow. You're not waiting days in between a new food. You're giving a new food at breakfast. If you want to give a new food at dinner, it's absolutely fine. If a child's ever going to have a reaction, it's likely not going to be at 4 months of age. It's not going to be at 5 months of age. It's not going to be at 6 months of age. And it's certainly not going to be after 2 hours. Allergic reactions happen within 2 hours of feeding. And the most common reactions in babies, of course, Darwin and the protection basically of infants growing up in time, is not throat swelling and respiratory problems. It's that babies, if they have a reaction, if you gave your baby a new food and they had a reaction, very unlikely, even in infancy or toddlerhood, the most common 2 reactions are that they get hives on their body or they vomit the food right away. Vomiting happens all the time. So you'd probably feed another food again. If it happened right away again, you might be like, oh, go talk to my pediatrician about that. But other than that, the earlier you do this, the better. So you just want to think about getting all these different foods in. And SpoonfulOne's like an insurance plan. It's just there to do it every single day, so that if you have a really good day or you breastfeed a lot this day and you don't get a lot of solid foods in and your baby's 7 months, and that's what you decide to enjoy that day, you still get all that diet diversity. You still get all that protein in a little bowl of cereal, in an express bottle of milk, or a bottle bottle of formula. And each and every day as your baby's growing up, they're getting all that exposure because it's not a one and done thing. Unfortunately, it's not that you can just introduce peanut or introduce soy or introduce sesame when your baby's 7 months of age and it's done. In fact, the research that's out there that's found that early introduction is effective, like the peanut study called the LEAP trial, for example, took babies as young as 4 months of age, fed them peanut 3 times a week, all the way till they went to kindergarten, till they were 60 months of age. And that's when we knew that the protection and the power was there. So it's making sure from the very beginning of life, you're just thinking, I want my baby to eat all sorts of things in the world. The earlier I get them all in and keep them in their diet, the better they'll be able to eat them all. And the better that they'll develop flavor preferences all over the spectrum. And the more that you'll be able to just share your family meals and not have these kind of kid menus for kids that become even picky, because you're going to, in some ways, really shape how your baby loves to eat food, how they love to enjoy it. And at the same time, you're going to be able to shape how your baby's immune system knows these foods really in time. So it's really, thinking about getting away from that old thinking that's super cautious and slow. I mean, I think pediatricians like me were a part of, I think making people a little bit scared of feeding. And now we're trying to liberalize that and say, in fact, if you want to do one at a time, you can do one at a time, but don't go slower than 1 new food a day. When you're going to the grocery or you're clicking through on Amazon or you're clicking through at the local grocery during the pandemic, you want to get whatever you can, buy a whole different assortment of different food and introduce all of those. And the SpoonfulOne solution is just to say, we want that immune system to be thinking about this every single day. Say, hey, there's peanut. Hey, there's soy, there's sesame, right? It's kind of every single day, the GI system, the immune system in the stomach is just recognizing those different food proteins, totally comfortable with them, and never, as your baby's getting older, progresses in a way where ultimately they could develop a sensitization in that way. So that's kind of the solution. I mean, I think the data is really clear. Not everybody wants to worry about food allergies, but 2 out of 3 babies who have a food allergy or children who have a food allergy don't have a parent with one. So it just means that the majority of kids with food allergies, they don't look at their family and see anybody with the same condition, which is why we saw a doubling of food allergies in each of the last decades. We believe it's environmental. We believe it's because of overuse of antibiotics and killing off normal bacteria. We know that it's likely the conditions of dry skin that can come from detergents and from eczema rashes and food being introduced into the skin rather than through the gut or through the tummy. We know that the kind of like the way that we've kind of protected our kids and that kind of hygiene hypothesis, like we want our babies out in the dirt, we want them playing in the farmlands, we want all that diversity as they're growing up, and then we want the diet to be really diverse. We want to make sure that you're not just kind of like our American diets, we know are increasingly simple and increasingly less complicated. And we know that's true of all industrialized nations. So for example, in Australia, we have 8% of kids with food allergies in the United States. In Australia, they have 10% of kids with food allergies. So they're working really hard too to try to get all this diet diversity, and they have great guidelines. Now, most children are, and parents are being really intentional about getting things like egg and peanut and soy. But it's some of these hard foods that we, with SpoonfulOne, we tried really hard to make sure. Shellfish is the #1 allergy in adulthood, and it can develop at any time in your life, but training that immune system early to get shellfish, to get cod, to get salmon, right, to get those different elements of the protein that teach the body really early is a longstanding strategy to avoid allergies in your whole life. And so as moms and dads are thinking about it, if you've got a baby that has eczema or has dry skin, the reason that we know that they're at higher risk is that the food proteins that are just in the kitchen or at the grocery or in the world are introduced to the immune system through that broken down skin. And if that's the case, you want to just make sure that you're getting it into the tummy so that immune system that can create what's called tolerance for foods can really get exposed and just kind of maintain that. The peanut study, for example, that was so groundbreaking back in 2015, were all eczema babies. They were all high-risk babies. They either had already developed an allergy to egg or they already had severe eczema. And so what they were showing is that it's stronger, the tolerance way, that if you get peanut into that tummy constantly, that overrides the sensitization that might happen through the skin that way. So that's kind of the philosophy on why that happens. So if you've got a baby with eczema, you want to, of course, work with your pediatrician, take really good care of their skin. But the minute they are interested in solids around 4 to 6 months of age, you want to get all of these different proteins into their tummies routinely so that as they're growing up, they don't create a sensitization, because that's the timing in that infancy and early childhood that we'll see kids develop a food allergy. We're not born with food allergies. Your babies are not born allergic to things. In fact, it's the immune system's growing and learning as you play in the world and as people hold them and as they explore the world through eating and through breathing that we know that those sensitizations do occur later on. So it's your job in some ways to be super intentional about enjoying eating, about following your baby's lead, but making sure you're getting all these different foods in super routinely. So I'm just wondering, I think there's a way that I could maybe even answer some questions, but I'm not exactly sure where I would see the questions. I'm in the backstage setup here, and I'm wondering maybe if I just don't want to lead you guys into the wrong place. So maybe if I can see the stage here. Yeah, I can see it. Here we are. Okay, so here's maybe some questions. Shelf life on the product, I think, I can have someone back you up. It's usually a year to a year and a half. So, you can certainly buy this in advance, and it'll last for quite some time. If you have any questions, you can always ask our customer service at SpoonfulOne.com that way. So my son is allergic to mangoes. Yeah. So, Jennifer, you bring up a really good point. So the reality is, in the academic literature on food allergies, there are about 237 different foods, for example, that are known allergens. Unfortunately, we can develop an allergy at any time in our life, and we can develop an allergy to anything. It's the immune system basically turning on itself. And when the surveillance of your little antibodies are going around, they're not recognizing the protein in that food as self or as safe. They're recognizing it as a threat, and then you kind of go down this line of allergic. Now, a lot of fruits and vegetables will cause something called oral allergy syndrome, which is somewhat different. And mango is a very common player. And in fact, even when I eat mango, I get a little funky feeling in my mouth, which is called oral allergy syndrome. But I don't have what's called a IgE mediated food allergy to mango, but lots of kids can. And again, you can have an allergy to anything. So let's see, early on, you're interested in baby-led feeding, maybe. Yeah. So baby has, okay, so Kathy Bradford, you ask a really important question, and lots of families and even pediatricians ask this. So, if, for example, your child did have a reaction to SpoonfulOne, it's theoretically possible because it's food, right? It's just any food, bomba, anything that you eat, right? Your child could have a reaction to it, and a mango, a strawberry, whatever it is. You could certainly have a reaction. What we know is that the amount of protein in SpoonfulOne, just that 30 milligrams, is one of the least likely to cause an allergic reaction in the first place. And it's also, we know, training the immune system from the research done at Stanford that we know of. That being said, if a child were to have already developed a food allergy to one of the 16 foods in SpoonfulOne, and they had hives immediately after eating it, or had vomiting, and then you tried the next day and you ate SpoonfulOne and they vomited again, you'd go to your pediatrician, you'd get a referral to the pediatric allergist, you'd go through probably a really detailed food allergy history. So you'd find out are you feeding your baby cheese? Are they getting yogurt? Have you fed peanut at other times? That's kind of fine. Have you done this? You do a detailed history, and then the allergist would likely do what's called skin prick testing, where they do tiny bits of tests to see what ingredients that are left from that history are they possibly allergic to. And of course, unfortunately, kids who have food allergies are often allergic to more than one food. So in the case that a child were to do allergy testing and they were to react, it would be possible that an allergist would then identify, for example, a peanut and a tree nut allergy or something. But the goal here, you guys, is never to have that happen. It's to get SpoonfulOne and all this kind of food diversity in at 4 to 6 months and keep it in so that allergy never develops. Most babies have not developed food allergies by the time they start foods. And so it's making sure you don't wait and kind of get those in. But that's how you do that. And we certainly have had an allergic baby eat SpoonfulOne and then go and work with a pediatric allergist to determine which one that was. That being said, we did an independent study, or actually researchers at Northwestern University back 2 years ago did a study where they fed over 700 babies in a placebo control, SpoonfulOne. Those were low-risk babies without a lot of risk factors like eczema or other things. And they fed them, and there were, over basically 100,000 feedings by the end of the study, and no allergic reactions in that group. So we know in a large population, it's extremely safe and unlikely. And those were young babies. So what we want is, of course, people to get it in early. That being said, if your baby's 9 or 10 months and you haven't introduced a lot of these foods, you can introduce them at the table, or you can try SpoonfulOne, and it's usually just a non-event. And then you're getting all that in. I mean, the earlier, the better, but truly diet diversity, getting all these different foods in your baby, the longer you wait, the bigger the risk. So a study out of Canada called the CHILD study, for example, took healthy babies, not even high-risk babies, and said, if parents waited until a year to introduce peanut, child was 4 times more likely to develop a peanut allergy. If the parent waited until a year and a half to introduce peanut, 7 times more likely to develop a peanut allergy. So, anytime earlier is better. So if your baby's 9 months or 10 months, or your baby's 4 months, 4 months is best. But if you get to the place where you're 9 or 10 months, oh my gosh, it's not too late. And certainly the longer you wait, it just, your risk increases. So that's why you want to kind of work on it. And you can always work with your pediatrician. I mean, I think every parent is different. Like, I think there's some moms out there who, when I think about being in clinical practice and talking with them, who like at 4 months would put SpoonfulOne in a baby's bottle of express milk or formula and give it to the baby and do it every day. Then there's some moms that would say, no, I'm going to introduce like mango, and then I'm going to introduce maybe peanut butter and some cereal, and then I'm going to do SpoonfulOne. Then there's some moms that will want to get like tree nuts, introduce some tree nuts, almond puree or cashew butter and soy and hopefully shrimp, and then do SpoonfulOne and keep it in on an everyday basis. Because the reality is, what's so hard is that keeping all those foods in regularly is just super hard. I mean, I have now, my boys are in middle school, but oh my gosh, getting diet diversity and throughout their lifetime is a challenge. I have to shop that way. I have to feed it. I have to keep on them. I have to keep offering it and offering it and offering it. So, we know it's just a ton of work. And so SpoonfulOne is really designed for that convenience. Someone's asking, I think here, how long? So no one knows exactly, how long you need, for example, shrimp in the diet every single week, or egg in the diet every single week. There are a bunch of studies on egg. There are a bunch of studies on peanut. There's some studies on tree nut. I mean, we're just learning in the medical literature. We know early is better. We know it's often. In the studies that we did that created SpoonfulOne, it was data that was collected, like I told you, at Stanford. And they fed those babies and children for a year. And then they drew their blood and they looked at their immune profile. So they looked at what are called food-specific IgEs, little antibodies, and something called IgG4, which is kind of a marker of tolerance. And what we found is that after a year, those blood levels were different. And so, from the studies that we know in peanut, and the study that we know, for example, called the EAT trial, that looked at whitefish, for example, and sesame and egg and peanut, we know that we'd like probably somewhere around a year of this ongoing, constant exposure to those proteins to train the immune system, say, these are not anything I'm going to get excited about. Move right along. And so we're recommending a year, and you can do it with table food if you can do it. But we also recognize it's just really hard for families to get all those different foods in. I mean, I didn't make my baby's baby food. I was a full-time pediatrician practicing, and, I bought organic baby food. And, there isn't any data that organic foods are necessarily better for our babies, but they make a lot of sense. There's less chemicals in them. The way they're grown is different. It's responsible, but there isn't a lot of health benefits. So some families will even just save money and say, I'm going to get conventionally made baby food, and then you can, get kind of the variety of things from something like SpoonfulOne on top of it. So, but it's really hard to get it all in, let alone, these kind of requirements where we're thinking about all these unique foods like fish and sesame and egg and all the tree nuts and all the ingredients that are in SpoonfulOne. So you can go to spoonfulone.com and read about it. We have a blog there. We are, certainly launching all different programs. We have about 3,000 pediatricians across the country that are sampling SpoonfulOne and recommending it for their families. And we just actually created this little infographic, which goes over everything I just told you about, which is just basically kind of what are the signs of readiness for your baby? What are kind of the good foods to start on? What's the kind of old way of thinking? What's the new way? This might be reversed. New way of thinking. And then kind of some stats on food allergies. You could just download this on the SpoonfulOne webpage, and but it's a new world. I mean, when my babies were born 10 plus years ago, we held off on these foods and we increased their risks for developing food allergy. And you guys are the parents of the future. And I sincerely believe we will have 1 million less kids without food allergies a decade from now if we do this right. And you guys are at the beginning of that time of telling other moms what you know about this, getting all these different foods into your baby, not being scared of food, and knowing that the earlier you get these foods in, the less likely allergic reaction in the first place, and the less likely, if you keep it in, that a baby will ever develop an allergy ever. And so, you have that power when you're feeding your babies. And it's like one of those amazing things about being a parent, like nourishing our kids feels amazing. And when you do it smarter like this, and you set your kids up for an even healthier life of great flavor and of totally free eating, it will be incredible. So I'm just trying to see if there's any other these are like there are lots coming through. I don't know, Stacey, if you want to ping through any other comment, but we'll come through here. I'll chat with you guys in the chat a little bit and just answer some of your questions. But thanks so much for having us. Visit us at SpoonfulOne. You can certainly email us if you've got any questions. We're connected with some of the world leading pediatric allergists and dietitians, and we're going to be launching a big study in December of this year. We'll be recruiting 4 to 6 month old babies, and we're going to be studying them until they're 2. So we're going to go out and really look at how do families feel about feeding, how does SpoonfulOne work, and how do we make sure that we can prove to the world that, babies will be more tolerant with all this different food diversity early in life. So stay tuned for that. That'll be on our website later in the winter time, and lots more science coming. But you can find me. I'm Dr. Wendy Sue Swanson on Instagram, and you can find us at SpoonfulOne. And thanks so much for having us. I'm going to sign off.